Hello.
Hi there, I'm Simon. I'm a poet. I write with and for children and families.
So, Simon, we've been chatting today a lot about running workshops with children and young people. I know
Yeah,
you're somewhat of an expert in this. So I've got a couple of questions for you that I
cool.
think might be useful for people to hear. My first one seems quite obvious. It's how do you prepare to run a workshop with kids?
First, I will try and connect with the teacher or the project manager of the school or kind of setting that I'm going to be working in. So I want to find out what age the children are, how many of them are, what their needs might be, what the aims or expectations for the project, and even just a kind of broad sense are. Hopefully either on email, but ideally to have a kind of a quick chat, like a general outline of like how I work, how that might apply to their school or their project. Making clear like who's leading which bits of it early, so that you both know what you're getting into. And then once I've got that information that I need, I'm going to plan the workshop, prepare for it. Broadly speaking, I use the same structure for each session, in terms of having like a warm up, then like a kind of skills build activity. Maybe in the main bit of writing, I might use a prompt-based exercise, quite a carefully sequenced series of quite simple questions, limited time to answer each. That functions almost like a scaffold. So once you remove those questions, what's left is the heart or the start of a poem, which can be built on in some way. I practice as well, like maybe not quite as much these days, because some of these sessions, which are my favorites, I have actually run quite a lot of times, but especially when I was beginning doing a workshop to a group of young people of say like 30 kids in a classroom, like, to be honest, that's closer to a gig than a workshop in some ways. And I imagine there's some poets watching this now, as it is on the Apples and Snakes channel, and I'm sure that some of those poets do gigs, and I very much hope that some of those poets practice for those gigs. I mean, there's some games that I've got, like activities that I have done many a time. Like I literally will introduce and explain that almost word for word the same every time. Like to begin with, I wrote and learned a few bits of text related to each workshop, or even potential scenarios in workshops. It sounds super geeky, but like if you suddenly need to be confident and in control in a situation where there's a bit of challenging behavior going on, you want to know what it is that you're going to say and feel confident it's the right thing to say. You don't want to be frustrated or confrontational. It's about how to manage those situations positively by reinforcing what your expectations or boundaries might be. So definitely running it through a lot would be something I would do in advance. You can be running that through on your own, like in your living room or wherever, just to practice getting it right. But I think almost more importantly than that is you've got to actually try the games out with kids.
Something that I've seen from you is prompt-based exercise. This idea of having a series of prompts that you ask that help to generate the poems. I know that on your YouTube channel, you've got lots of videos that you've made which have lots of these sort of prompt-based exercises. And they're all free for people to just access. I know I've done quite a few of those with my kids through lockdown.
Oh, yes, mate.
It's saved me a lot of energy, to be honest. I've really found it a valuable
Once they're recorded, you've put the energy in, haven't you? That's the other nice thing. My kids won't do them, obviously, because it's me.
Of course. And what was the motivation behind setting all that up?
It was a crazy hard time for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, of course. But for me, the thought that like each one of those views was potentially like an actual child or family doing a creative act at home and like enjoying it enough to then type a little thing up afterwards saying, here's the poem that we wrote. Like that would be massive in my week with my kid if that happened to me. Do you know what I mean? Like an equivalent thing where we did something together and then shared it to the creator of the thing and they got back saying, oh yeah, I like that. As well as it being like a fun and rewarding thing to do, to learn how to have fun with words and to express yourself. I think that children that like look at the world in that careful, creative way in order to do writing, I think they carry on looking at the world in that way when they're not writing. And I think that that is a good thing for them. And I also think it's a good thing for the world. The world is a crazy, crazy place. And the more young poets we can have in it, I think the better, to be honest.
And I know from my experience, lots of children, lots of young people, they worry about doing it wrong. And I know you put a strong emphasis on that not being a thing, that you can't do it wrong, that whatever the most random idea you've had is probably going to work in a poem. And that's how you make good poems. So my question is that what makes good poems? Or in your opinion, what makes a good kid's poem?
Okay, so I think there's two questions. One, I think the approach that you've suggested is an approach I would 100% endorse, but for the first part of the writing process. So I would say that your writing brain is those two parts. So you've got the creator, and they come up with like an infinite amount of ideas about anything, and all of those ideas are like potentially brilliant, you know, potentially rubbish, but like you don't know until you've put them down. And then maybe there is a time, and this is something that some, you know, younger writers often do find challenging, like re-engaging that editing bit of the brain. It's not useful to have that internal editor initially because you just need to get it all out. But then at some point you may need to re-engage them. And so the way I try and get around that is to have the prompts to quickly generate that material and then re-engage the editor to kind of sift through that. And instead of saying redraft or edit your work, I try and find other little phrases like pick your favorite bits, put them in an order that sounds good. In terms of what makes a good children's poem, I think that's a much broader question. And I would say it's the same question as what makes a poem, like a good poem. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it's any different question to that. It's such an indefinable thing. It's got to feel like a thing in its own right, as well as a thing that is about the world. It needs to be a thing that is in the world as well as about the world. I read that somewhere, but it's not just a bit of writing about something. A poem is an actual thing.
The final thing I'd like to ask you is, have you got a writing task for it?
My writing challenge for you is to pick like a well-known acronym, like the one I chose was Be Right Back, BRB, and then to just try and think of a load of other things it could stand for. My plan was to link up into a poem, but then I also think sometimes like a writing activity doesn't always have to lead to a poem.
No.
Do you know what I mean? But pick an acronym, for example, BRB, come up with a long list of other things it could stand for. And if you get lucky or you get genius, then make that into a poem.
Amazing. Simon, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, man. Nice one.
No problem. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.